So hello and welcome back to Tongue Twisters with Lewis Carroll, also known as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, where we are on Through the Looking Glass. And I had to say that this was Tongue Twisters with Lewis because he's really good at throwing out words that I don't know how to say. I take my best stab at them, which is, I think, all we can do. I mean, technically, I guess I probably could pause the video and go look them all up, but I'd be pausing the video a whole lot. Not for everything, but for a whole lot. I did like that in his introduction a couple chapters ago, he tried to give pronunciation guides, and even that went over my head. I hope I pronounced Jabberwocky right, because it's the way it looks. Anyway, I hope you guys are doing good. I hope if you celebrate, you had a good Memorial Day. I hope that your weather is lovely. Ours is cloudy, but we're back to being warm, and I really appreciate that. And I was peeking at our next chapter title, and I personally have to say, I hope that Alice's version are nicer than the ones that are outside, and we'll just leave it at that. Anyway, I'm not going to waffle on too much this time because it's warm and I have to keep the door closed to kind of keep the room quiet. And I don't have a ceiling fan in here, so I'm going to sweat a little bit. Which is funny to say considering I was just crying about frost a couple days ago. Weather in Michigan. You gotta love it. Anyway, we are jumping back into Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Discovered There by Lewis Carroll, and we are on Chapter 3, which is titled Looking Glass Insects. Of course, the first thing to do was to make a grand survey of the country she was going to travel through. It's something very like learning geography, thought Alice, as she stood on tiptoe in hopes of being able to see a little further. Principal rivers? There are none. Principal mountains? I'm on the other one, but I don't think it's got any name. Principal town? Why, what are those creatures making honey down there? They can't be bees. Nobody ever saw bees a mile off, you know. And for a while she stood silent, watching one of them that was bustling about among the flowers, poking its proboscis into them. Just as if it were a regular bee, thought Alice. However, this was anything but a regular bee. In fact, it was an elephant, as Alice soon found out, though the idea quite took her breath away at first. And what enormous flowers they must be, was her next idea. Something like cottages with the roofs taken off and stalks put to them. And what quantities of honey they must make. I think I'll go down and... No, I won't go just yet, she said, checking herself just as she was beginning to run down the hill and trying to find some excuse for turning shy so suddenly. It'll never do to go down among them without a good long branch to brush them away. And what fun it'll be when they ask me how I like my walk. I'll say, oh, I liked it well enough. And here came the favorite little toss of her head. Only it was so dusty and hot. The elephants did tease so. I think I'll go down the other way, said Alice after a pause. And perhaps I may visit the elephants later on. Besides, I do so want to get to the third square. And so, with this excuse, she ran down the hill and jumped over the first of one of the 6 little brooks. Like so. Tickets, please, said the guard, putting his head in at the window. In a moment, everyone was holding out a ticket. They were about the same size as the people and quite seemed to fill the carriage. We missed nothing there. I'll have you know. So with this excuse, she ran down and jumped over the 6 little brooks, and suddenly we're in a rail car? Okay. Tickets, please, said the guard, putting his head in at the window. In a moment, everyone was holding out a ticket. They were about the same size as the people and quite seemed to fill the carriage. Now then, show your ticket, child, the guard said, looking angrily at Alice. And a great many voices all said together, like the chorus of a song, "Don't keep him waiting, child. Why, his time is worth £1,000 a minute." I'm afraid I haven't got one, said Alice in a frightened tone. There wasn't a ticket office where I came from. And again came the chorus of voices. There wasn't room for one where she came from. The land there is worth £1,000 an inch. Don't make excuses, said the guard. You should have bought one from the engine driver. And once more the chorus of voices said, the man that drives the engine. Why, the smoke alone is worth £1,000 a puff. Alice thought to herself, then there's no use in speaking. The voices didn't join in this time, as she hadn't spoken. But to her great surprise, they all thought in chorus. I hope you understand what thinking in chorus means, for I must confess that I don't. Better say nothing at all. Language is worth £1,000 a word. I shall dream about £1,000 tonight. I know I will, thought Alice. All this time the guard was looking at her, first through a telescope, then through a microscope, and then through an opera glass. At last he said, You're traveling the wrong way, and shut the window and left. So young a child, said the gentleman sitting opposite to her. He was dressed in white paper. Ought to know which way she's going, even if she doesn't know her own name. A goat that was sitting next to the gentleman in white shut his eyes and said loud, She ought to know her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know her alphabet. There was a beetle sitting next to the goat. It was a very queer carriage full of passengers altogether. And as the rule seemed to be that they all speak in turn, he said, She'll have to go back from here as luggage. Alice couldn't see who was sitting beyond the beetle, but a hoarse voice said, Change engines, it said. And then it choked and was obliged to stop speaking. It sounds like a horse, thought Alice to herself. And an extremely small voice close to her ear said, You might make a joke on that. Something about horse and horse, you know. And we have a picture. Then a very gentle voice in the distance said, She must be labeled lass with care, you know. And after that, the other voices went on. What a number of people there are in this carriage, thought Alice. And they were saying, She must go by post. She's got a head on her. She must be sent as a message by telegraph. She must draw the train herself the rest of the way. And so on and so on. But the gentleman dressed in white paper leaned forward and whispered in her ear, Never mind what they all say, my dear, but take a return ticket every time the train stops. Indeed I shan't, said Alice impatiently. I don't belong to this railway journey after all. I was just in a wood now, and I wish I could go back there. You might make a joke on that, said the little voice close to her ear. Something about you would if you could, you know. Don't tease, said Alice, looking around in vain to see where the voice was coming from. If you're so anxious to have a joke made, why don't you make one yourself?" The little voice sighed deeply. It was very unhappy, evidently, and Alice would have said something pitying to comfort it, if only it would sigh like other people, she thought. But it was such a wonderfully small sigh that she wouldn't have heard it at all if it wasn't so close to her ear. The consequence of this was that it tickled her ear very much and quite took off her thoughts from the unhappiness of the poor little creature. "I know you're a friend," the little voice went on, "a dear friend and an old friend, and you wouldn't hurt me, though I am an insect." "What kind of an insect?" said Alice, a little anxiously. What she really wanted to know was whether it could sting or not, but she thought this wouldn't be quite a civil question to ask. "What then? You don't—" the little voice began, but suddenly it was drowned out by a shrill scream from the engine, and everyone jumped in alarm, Alice included. The horse, who had put his head out of the window, quietly pulled it in and said, "It's only a brook we have to jump over." Everyone seemed satisfied with this, though Alice felt a little nervous at the idea of a train jumping at all. "However, it'll take us into the fourth square, and that's a comfort," she said to herself. In another moment, she felt the carriage rise straight up into the air, and in her fright, she caught at the thing nearest to her hand, which happened to be the goat's beard. Dot, 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 dot. But the beard seemed to melt away as she touched it, and she found herself sitting quietly under a tree. Well, the gnat, for that was the insect she had been talking to, was balancing itself on a twig over her head, fanning her with its wings. It certainly was a very large gnat. About the size of a chicken, thought Alice. Still, she couldn't feel nervous with it after they had been talking for so long. "Then you don't like all insects?" the gnat went on, as if nothing had happened. "I like them when they can't talk," said Alice. "None of them ever talk where I come from." "What sort of insects do you rejoice in where you come from?" said the gnat. "I don't rejoice in insects at all," said Alice, "because I'm rather afraid of them. At least the large kinds, but I can tell you the names of some of them." And we have another picture, and this is the strangest looking gnat I've ever seen. "Of course, they answer to their names, do they?" said the gnat. "I have never known them to." "What's the use of their having names," said the gnat, "if they won't answer to them?" "No use to them," said Alice, "but it's useful to the people that name them, I suppose. If not, why do things have name at all?" "I can't say," said the gnat. "Further on, in the wood down there, they've got no names. However, go on with your list of insects. You're wasting time." "Well, there's the horsefly," said Alice, counting off names on her fingers. "All right," said the gnat. "Halfway up that bush, you'll see a rocking horsefly if you look. It's made entirely of wood, and it gets around by swinging itself from branch to branch." "What does it live on?" Alice asked with curiosity. "Sap and sawdust," said the gnat. "Go on with the list." Alice looked at the rocking horsefly with interest and made up her mind that it must have just been repainted, it was so bright and sticky, and then she went on. "Well, there's the dragonfly." "Look on the branch above your head," said the gnat, "and there you'll find a snapdragonfly. Its body is made of plum pudding, and its wings of holly leaves, and its head is a raisin burning in brandy." And we also have a picture of that. And what does it live on? Said Alice. Frumenty and mince pie, said the gnat, and it makes its nest in a Christmas box. And there's the butterfly, said Alice, after she had taken a good look at the insect with its head on fire and had thought to herself, I wonder if that's the reason insects are so afraid of flying into candles, because they're afraid that they'll turn into snapdragonflies. Crawling at your feet, said the gnat. Alice pulled her feet back in some alarm. You may observe a bread and butterfly. Its wings are thin slices of bread and butter, its body is a crust, and its head a lump of sugar. And what does it live on? Said Alice. Weak tea with cream in it. A new difficulty came into Alice's head. What if it couldn't find any? Then it would die, of course. But that has to happen very often, Alice said thoughtfully. It always happens, said the gnat. After this, Alice was silent for a minute or two, pondering. The gnat amused itself meanwhile by humming round and round her head. At last it settled and said, I suppose you don't want to lose your name. No, said Alice a bit anxiously. And yet I don't know, said the gnat in a careless tone. Only think how convenient it would be if you could manage to go home without it. For instance, if the governess wanted to call you to your lessons, she would call out, Come here! And there she would have to leave off, because there wouldn't be any name for her to call, and of course you wouldn't have to go then, you know. That would never do, I'm sure, said Alice. The governess would never think of excusing me lessons for that. If she couldn't remember my name, she'd call me Miss, the way the servants do. Well, if she said Miss, and didn't say anything more, said the gnat, of course you'd miss your lessons. That's a joke. I wish you had made it. Why do you wish I had made it? Said Alice. It's a very bad joke. But the gnat only sighed deeply, while 2 large tears rolled down its cheeks. You shouldn't make jokes, said Alice, if it makes you so unhappy. Then came another of those melancholy sighs, and this time the poor gnat really seemed to have sighed itself away, for when Alice looked up there was nothing whatever to be seen on the twig. And as she was getting quite chilly with sitting still so long, she got up and walked on. She very soon came to an open field with a wood on the other side of it. It looked much darker than the last wood, and Alice felt a little timid about going into it. However, on second thoughts, she made up her mind to go on. For I certainly won't go back, she said to herself. And this was the only way to the 8th square. This must be the wood, she thought to herself, where things have no names. I wonder what'll become of my name when I go in. I shouldn't like to lose it at all, because they'd have to give me another, and it would be almost certain to be an ugly one. But then the fun would be trying to find the creature who had my old name. That's just like the advertisements, you know, when people lose dogs. Answers to the name of Dash, had on a brass collar. Just fancy calling everyone that you met Alice until one of them answered. Only they won't answer at all, not if they were wise. She was rambling on this way when she reached the wood. It looked quite cool and shady. Well, at any rate, it's a great comfort, she said as she stepped under the trees. After being so hot to get into what? She went on. a bit surprised at not being able to think of the word. I mean to get under under this, she said, putting her hand on the trunk of the tree. What does it call itself, I wonder? I do believe it's got no name. Why, to be sure it doesn't. She stood silent for a minute, thinking. Then she suddenly began again. Then it really has happened after all. And now, who am I? I will remember if I can. I'm determined to do so. But being determined didn't help her much. And all she could say after a great deal of puzzling was, L. I know it began with an L. Just then a fawn came wandering by. It looked at Alice with its large, gentle eyes, but didn't seem at all frightened. Here then, Alice said, as she held out her hand and tried to pet it, but it only stared back a little, and then it stood looking at her again. What do you call yourself? Said the fawn at last. What a soft, sweet voice it had. I wish I knew, thought poor Alice, but she answered sadly, nothing right now. Think again, it said. That won't do. Alice thought, but nothing came of it. Please, would you tell me what you call yourself? She said timidly. I think that might help a little. I'll tell you, if you'll come a little further in. I can't remember here. So they walked together through the wood. Alice, with her arms clasped lovingly around the neck of the fawn, until they came out into another open field, and here the fawn gave a sudden bound into the air and shook itself free of Alice's arm. I'm a fawn, it cried out, and dear me, you're a human child. A sudden look of alarm came into its brown eyes, and in another minute it darted away at full speed. Alice stood, looking after it, almost ready to cry with vexation at having lost her dear little fellow traveler so suddenly. However, I know my name now, she said, and that's some comfort. Alice. Alice, I won't forget that again. And now, which of these finger posts ought I follow, I wonder? It was not a very difficult question to answer, as there was only one road through the wood, and the two finger posts both pointed along it. I'll settle it, said Alice to herself, when the road divides and they point in different ways. But this didn't seem likely to happen. She went on and on a long way, but wherever the road divided, there were sure to be two finger posts pointing in the same way. One marked to Tweedledum's house, and the other to the house of Tweedledee. I do believe, said Alice, that they live in the same house. I wonder, I've never thought of that before, but I can't stay there long. I'll just call and say, how d'ye do? And ask them the way out of the wood. If only I could get to the 8th square before it gets dark. And then she wandered on, talking to herself as she went, till, turning a sharp corner, she came upon two fat little men so suddenly that she couldn't help starting back, but in another moment she recovered herself, feeling quite sure that they must be who she was looking for. And that is the end of the chapter. That was different. I don't know why I thought traveling in Wonderland would be normal, but that was very jarring, going from walking to sitting in a train car. Interesting transition. We'll just leave it at definitely interesting transition. I liked the gnat. I tried to make it high pitched when it was whispering. I don't know if that came through or not, but I think I liked the gnat. I also liked the fact that the rocking horsefly depiction came a full page before we saw it. I thought that was supposed to be the gnat when I was looking at the picture. I'm also very happy that the insects in the looking glass world are a little more interesting and a little less bitey than the insects in the outside world. The mosquitoes have begun to come out. And in a way, that's better because mosquitoes don't like to chew on me as much as black flies do. But in a way, it's also worse because when they do chew, it hurts. I don't know if anyone else has ever had that experience, or maybe it's just something with the mosquitoes in the Upper Peninsula. But when they bite you, it hurts. And that took me by surprise, and now it just makes me very offended. Anyway, that is where we are going to leave this today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that chapter as much as I enjoyed being befuddled by it. And I will see you next time.